want to talk tonight about a verse in the 33rd chapter of the Psalter. Let your steadfast love be upon us, O God, even as we hope in you. One of my favorite theologians and ministers is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. During the Second World War, most of the churches in Germany were state churches, and they received their funding from the government. And so most of the ministers never spoke out about the atrocities that were happening in Germany. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer was the exception. His great book that I would recommend all of us to read again and again, The Cost of Discipleship. In that book, Dietrich Bonhoeffer says something that is fascinating. He said, we must learn to allow ourselves not just to interpret God, but the main thing is for God to interpret us. I looked at that and I thought to myself, what in the world does that mean? We're not in the business of interpreting all that God is, but we are in the business of allowing God to interpret us and to know, as Henry Nouwen says, that we are daughters and sons of God. Through our lives, things sometimes happen that we don't understand. I remember the last time I saw my mother alive, we were living in Louisville and we'd made a trip to Florida. I was so excited about trying to get there as early as possible in the afternoon to visit with her and my dad. I walked in the door, Diane, family, and I, about 2:30. My mother was seated in her chair, and I could tell by the way she looked that she was not thrilled that we were there. I said, Mom, she had the TV on, are you watching some shows? She says, yes, I have some soap operas that I watch from 1 to 4. Would you mind to go to the mall down the street and then come back at 4 o'clock? Can you imagine? Here you've driven all this way. But I understood how these soap operas had become a part of the fabric of my mother's life. I could come back in an hour and a half, but the stories needed to go on. I think about my mother often. I did her funeral. My mother was not expressive of her love. In fact, I don't remember many times her ever saying to me that she loved me. But the last time that I saw her alive, we were getting ready to get in the car and go home. And she grabbed me and she gave me a hug. It was unlike any other hug that I'd ever had from her. And she said, I love you. 2 months later, my brother called. She had been taken to the hospital. I called, made arrangements to take the first flight I could. But before I even left the house, my brother called back to say that our mother had died. When I had her funeral, I said, my mother didn't have it easy when she was growing up. I don't know whether she was ever told that her mom or dad loved her, but I always knew that she loved me. When I did the funeral, I said, I can't separate myself from my mother. There's no distance here. So, what I want to do is, I want to talk to her and I want to talk to you about her. And then I shared the story of her impact on my life. When I was called into the ministry, 15 years old, I had no idea what a pastor did. I mean, I knew that the pastor stood up on Sundays and spoke, and that seemed to be fine. But when I became a minister, all of a sudden I understood the complexity of all of this. I am the kind of person who likes to fix other people's lives. And when you're a minister, you're thrust into a situation where you can't fix other people's lives. Walking away from where we had just buried his wife, I took his arm and I knew that it wouldn't be long before we would be back at the cemetery doing his funeral. They had been married for 70 years. I look out trying to preach sermons that fix people's lives, and I see the gaunt-faced woman sitting on the second row. She is dying of cancer. I don't know how physically she even made it to church, but I suspect that it was because she needed God and she needed her friends. We will be faithful to each other until death do us part. And in the back row, a couple, he had been unfaithful, and she was ready to get a divorce. Can I reach out to fix all of those things? Maybe it really isn't about fixing things. As much as it is to allow God to interpret us in terms of the lives we live. Let your steadfast love be upon us, O Lord. Let your hope be in us. I thought to myself, we're not talking in an abstract way about hope or love. We're talking about the way hope and love come to you and me. Oh God, your steadfast love be upon us. And suddenly, the Bible is becoming more than just pages, just words on a page, but it's becoming words that pop out into our lives and mix and mingle with the frustrations and the joys and the disappointments that we have in our lives. Let your hope, it doesn't stop there. Let your hope be in us. And suddenly, Hope is just rising out of those pages. And if you're a minister, you need to feel it's being baked into your own life if you're going to share this in an authentic way with people. Bonhoeffer said, let's realize that there are times when we need to have our lives interpreted by God. Your steadfast love be upon us. Your hope be in us. It is sheer gift from God. The hope we have is the hope of the God who is alive in us.